special edition of Late Night Health. I'm Mark Alyn. I'm really happy to speak with a friend of mine. He has put up with me for more than 40 years. I can't believe I said that out loud. His name is Jeffrey Levy. He's an author, a playwright, a poet. He's a nice guy. He's a theater director. He taught many years at Cal State University Northridge, where I met him when I was part of the NPR radio station that was at the school at the time, and we became friends. In fact, one of the things that I remember most, besides getting a little bit tipsy at a party of his and his wife's Heidi, is that other than my own kids, I held your daughter hours after she was born, the youngest child I've ever held in my life, other than my own kids. So
I
that's how
remember you were terrified.
I was terrified. I had been holding a tray of cold cuts, and your wife came out and said, "You're holding that wrong. Switch with me." I'd rather have the pastrami. Anyway, we're going to talk about Jeff's book. It actually debuts on July 5th, 2021. The name of the book is Purpose, Focus, and Practice, and you can see a copy of the cover here on our screen. It's The Life, Lessons, and Legislation of Joyce Cohen by Jeffrey Levy. How did you decide to write kind of a biography of somebody you just kind of met?
Well, Joyce is a fascinating person, a person of incredible willpower, and um, the idea kind of generated from a time when we were sharing a fundraising event for the Tai Chi Society, and I did a poetry reading, and she absolutely encouraged me to publish a book of poetry, which I did. And I think out of that kind of generated the idea of her sharing lessons that she felt were useful, particularly for young women, although not just for young women, about moving in their lives and how to have an effective life.
You, I mean, she's mentored many people in her life. I mean, she's been a legislator and much more in the state of Oregon, where you live in Portland. I love her I guess her title, Smiling Barracuda. She must have been hell on wheels in the legislature.
People were sometimes afraid to meet her. If they didn't know her, they would ask somebody to go with her. But once you got to know her, um, people said she had a heart of gold. She was just very direct, pulled no punches, um, uh, was very clear about what she stood for, um, but also understood that compromising and uh, working with the other side. She was a progressive Democrat, but formed lifelong um, relationships with conservative Republicans. Um, and yeah, she was a force.
That's like Ruth Ginsburg would have dinner with Scalia, and they'd go to the opera or
Yeah.
dinner or something. I think that's the way politics should work. Was she upset in the last couple of years? Was she upset about the disenfranchise of the Americans because of the polarity that sprung up during the last four and a half years?
She she can hardly understand it. She all her life worked across the aisle and understood how important that was. That came somewhat from her history because she grew up in South Dakota, um, a farm life, almost Little House on the Prairie, and then moved to Southern California and eventually to Portland, So she was always very comfortable with the rural, um, stoic farmer rancher things, at the same time being very comfortable with cosmopolitan social life.
Uh, that the farm life. I mean, you grew up in Indiana, if I'm remembering correctly. Um, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, so my urbanness is non-existent. But she grew up with animals and milking, and I mean the as you said, little life on the prairie. Do you think that formed her life, her desires for herself and society?
Completely. Some of the features of that were uh, an absolute self-reliance. She did not get a lot of instruction or even support from her parents, but in the farm life, you did what needed to be done. And if you didn't know how to do it, you figured it out and you did it on your own. At the same time, she had a really strong connection with nature, with animals, with uh, uh, plant life and rocks. And she wanted to be really a doctor, but her family couldn't afford to send her to medical school. Um, but she, at 17, left uh, the life she had known and gone to Minneapolis, enrolled in what we would now call a community college to get a medical technician's degree. Um, and she was very interested in serving people. And of course, she was great with lab animals during research.
uh, that desire to help others, is that what led her into politics?
Uh, Essentially, yeah. She also had uh, a reliance on speaking the truth and being honest and direct. And when she came across under the table dealings in Lake Oswego, which is a suburb of Portland, she was appalled at how things were done in secret. And so that was one of her initiating um, campaigns, was a sunshine law that meetings had to be in public, the public had to be informed, there had to be advance notice, there had to be notes. And the other thing that really got her going was the environment. She was a very early opponent of the Trojan nuclear plant, which in Oregon, which was subsequently shut down because of leakage and problems with it. Um, and so preserving nature and natural resources uh, were a great part of her service. And the other thing I think in general was health. She was always concerned about health. She had seen enough poverty in her life, um, of others, that she realized how important healthcare was.
Looking at her, it's kind of almost an Abe Lincoln story, right? That's
Yeah.
that's what flashed through my mind while I was reading. And you met her after she had left the legislature, and she had suffered a stroke.
She had suffered an intense stroke, and was paralyzed in half her body, remains paralyzed in half her body, um, continued to serve out her legislative term. And then she was a very close friend and colleague of the governor, John Kitzhaber. She was appointed to a very important regional committee that um, plans power usage and environmental concerns for 5 states. And she remained to this day in connection with all kinds of political people. Kitzhaber calls her once or twice a week, gets her reactions to projects he's working on. Um, but overcoming her stroke, which of course for anyone is difficult, but everyone I've known who knew her at the time said they can't imagine anyone else succeeding the way she did. They said it was just overwhelming how curbed she was by the stroke. She had to learn everything, how to talk again, how to use her hands, how to get around. And then in the process of doing that, taking up Tai Chi, continuing to travel the world. She has fascinating stories of visiting Hawaii, and her friends went out in a boat to a place where the dolphins were, and she wanted to go along. And so she figured out how to rig up a buoy. Now imagine being paralyzed in the water and half your body. And she insisted on getting in the water and paddling to where the dolphins were.
And letting the dolphins play with her,
And play with her, yeah.
right?
That kind of will force is remarkable. And that was to know Joyce is to meet that force of nature.
When you met her, I guess you were a beginner in Tai Chi at that time?
Yeah, early on. Early
Early
on.
on. And I guess she was behind you and made comments.
But
She obviously has a sense of humor.
yeah, and it was it with another person, it could have been a little insulting and invasive. I mean, it was very direct, and it was teasing me about not bending from the hip properly. And she said, "Oh, now you found your hip." Um, uh, but I just liked it because it was very straightforward, and behind it was no ill humor. It reminds me of the story they used to tell about Don Rickles
Oh,
who was very insulting all the time in his performances. And then everybody who knew him said he was the most supportive guy and the nicest guy. And the only reason he could get away with that public persona was behind it was a real caring gentleman.
yeah.
I
He
think that's true.
before he passed, he played at a local theater here in the Conejo Valley where I live. I wish I had gone because who knew that who knew that he passed shortly after that. Tell us one story, one funny story about Joyce.
Uh, Funny. So, well, this is a dear friend of hers uh, was taking care of her. This was after the stroke, um, and um, Joyce would carry plants to the sink to water them, which was very, very difficult for her to do. But she insisted on doing it, and her friend kept saying, "Well, let's get you a rolling cart." Absolutely not. No, don't want a rolling cart. Why don't we get you a rolling cart? No, we won't get a rolling cart. And so finally, of course, the friend just went out and bought one. And, Joyce said, "Well, I knew you were going to do that." Um, but of course, then she loved it. And every time after that, I'm using the rolling cart again. So, yes.
Your friendship with Joyce, you know, expanded. I mean, she encouraged you to publish your poetry. Um, how did that evolve? I mean, from being teased in a Tai Chi class, which you now teach, I believe. Um, you should come down to Southern California and you can tease me about my ability to not bend at the hip. Um, how did that evolve?
Well, I think it was a process of working together on the dinner. And then I actually kind of lost track of her because she had another minor stroke, had to move out of independent living into assisted living. Um, and I heard through the grapevine that she was intending to end her life. Um, and
Which is legal in the state of Oregon under certain.
under certain, which she helped craft that law, but she actually would not have fit the criteria to um, use physician-assisted suicide since her condition isn't terminal. Um, and I just called her up and asked if I could come see her just out of friendliness. And she was so happy to see me. Uh, and she began to pitch this idea that she wanted to continue her purpose in life, to continue to help people and advise them. And was I interested in helping with that? So it started kind of slowly, and she would tell me parts of her life. I began to take notes. And then she said, well, let me get you in touch with John Kitzhaber, the former governor, and Bill Bradbury, who is another major politician in Oregon, and a whole bunch of other people that she knew. And at that point, the project was rolling.
What about interaction with your family, your wife, or was this something that's separate?
Um, Well, it's pretty much an independent project.
Yeah.
Many years ago, Joyce came to dinner at our house, so Heidi knew Joyce, um, and uh, yeah, my writing activities and my family life are pretty separate. Um, so there's
Got
not a
it.
lot of conflict or a crossover in that.
And the book itself, the life lessons and legislation of Joyce Cohen. Why should somebody in, well, South Dakota, New York, or here in California, why is this important for us to read?
I think that there are two aspects. One is um, the odyssey of her life, which is unexpected, and the triumph of her overcoming uh, obstacles and moving from a very um, in one sense very restricted background, at least socially, um, to a very gregarious life is just an interesting story in itself. But at the end of each section of the book are um, what we used to call life lessons um, and advice that she uh, very consciously would like people to examine, to meet obstacles in their life, to um, work across the aisle, to understand the regenerative power of nature, um, uh, to for young women to not be afraid to speak out and be direct and things like that. So I think it will strike different people in different ways, in addition to being a good story about an unexpected life.
Could it be a movie?
I've thought about that. Of course, my background is more playwriting, so I thought about possibly putting it in that form. But I think one could make a pretty interesting movie, given also the places that she had been. Cuba um, before the revolution. She was very involved in. Um, uh, she wasn't directly involved in the Black Panther movement, but she was involved in Watts at the time of the Watts riot, and then in Oregon politics. So a lot of different worlds that she had been in, um, as well as heavy duty medical research. She published a paper on um, the binding of hemoglobin and DNA. I can't even recite the title of, but it was a
Wow.
peer reviewed paper on DNA research and radiation. So the different worlds that she's been in is are is fascinating.
What about her family? I mean, was she married? children?
Yeah, her first husband was a social activist, and they moved to Oregon together. But as she began to get involved in politics, it put quite a strain on the marriage, and that slowly began to fall apart. Um, she was, by her own admission, somewhat of an absent mother because she was so politically involved, and the family was always making yard signs and posters and helping campaigning material. Um, and then she remarried another a guy who became assistant in the Clinton administration. He was an assistant at the Department of Transportation, I believe. And that marriage went on for 20 years. But then then Joyce's stroke happened, and um, their paths just were divergent. She has a couple of kids, um, a son and a daughter. And there's some strains uh, from their childhood in that relationship. But she has a great relationship with her six grandchildren,
Oh, wow.
and has traveled with them, mentored them, helped them financially, um, set standards. She really wanted to encourage them all to be involved in science and environmental science. And so her kids are, one's in Scotland, grandkids, one's in Scotland, one is a solar researcher, and so on. Uh,
Wow.
and I think some of what she may have missed in raising her own children, she put towards her grandchildren.
Uh, I should have asked this earlier. How old is Joyce now? And how
Uh,
long ago did her stroke happen?
she's 84 now. The stroke happened in 93, so that's almost 30 years ago now.
Oh my God.
You know? And
Talk about
up
willpower.
until 2014, she lived independently. She had a beautiful loft in a part of Portland called the Pearl District. Um, she drove herself. Um, another interesting story, and I confirmed this from when she began Tai Chi. She went into take a beginning class, and after a move or two, she fell down. Um, and the teacher, of course, rushed over to her, and she quite brusquely said, get away, I'll get up on my own." Um,
Wow.
and that happened again and again. Of course, the teacher learned if Joyce falls, she knows what she's doing. She's going to get up on her own. Um, but imagine that force there.
That's that yeah, that life force. Well, I'm partially through the book, everybody. It is compelling. Jeff is a great writer. I've read other works by Jeff, and I've seen his directing at the Teenage Drama Workshop at Cal State Northridge. Um, uh, Jeff himself is a Renaissance man. He does everything, and I appreciate your time today. If somebody is interested in the book, it is not available on Amazon.
No, it is available.
Oh, it is available on Amazon.
Amazon or our local Powell's, which is the big bookstore in Portland, has an online presence. Barnes and Noble, Book World, all online available. Of
I
course,
love Powell.
you could get it from me.
Oh, you can get it. Is there a website or anything?
JeffreyLevyAuthor.com.
JeffreyLevyAuthor.com. Um, it's funny. I was at a market the other day, and somebody is throwing groceries into one of their bags, and it said, you know, support your local bookstore, Powell's. And I had to say I'm not allowed in there. Uh, if my wife is around because I buy stuff, you know.
I'm the same way. And I'd also give a little shout out to our little local bookstore where I live. Wallace Books is
Oh,
carrying
Wallace Books.
Wallace Books.
Wallace Books. All righty. All right. Jeffrey, thank you very much for spending some time with us. This is a fascinating story. The name of the book, as you can see, is Purpose, Focus, and Practice by Jeffrey Levy, about the life lessons and legislation of Joyce Cohen. I'm Mark Alyn. This is Late Night Health. We'll be back very soon.
Thanks.